The needle went through the pad of her left index finger again, and Lyra felt the warm bead of blood before she felt the pain. It rolled down the silver thread and was absorbed into the weave, turning the Moonthread from pale white to a faint, living rose. Somewhere beyond the walls of the weaving cellar, the horns sounded. 3 long blasts. The Alpha King's war party was returning from the Eastern Front, and she had 4 hours left to finish the chest plate before they stripped her loom and gave the thread allocation to someone who could actually see what they were stitching. She could not see what she was stitching. She had not been able to see anything for 3 years. Not since the fever took her sight along with her mother and her standing in the Ashen Moor pack. What Lyra could do was feel. The Moonthread had a particular vibration between her fingers, a hum like a tuning fork pressed to bone, and if she followed that hum and let the rhythm guide the shuttle, the weave came out tighter than anything the sighted weavers produced. She knew this because the quartermaster, Hester, sold Lyra's work to the officers at triple the price of standard armor cloth, while paying Lyra in table scraps and a cot in the cellar, where the damp made her knuckles swell. Hester's boots were on the stairs now. Lyra recognized the cadence, the slight drag of the left heel where the woman favored her bad knee. There was a second set of footsteps, too. Lighter. The sharp click of decorative buckles on fine leather. Serafina. The former Beta's daughter had a voice like something sweet left out too long, cloying and starting to turn. She spoke before she reached the bottom step. "Is the blind rat still breathing down here?" "Goddess, it smells like mildew and copper." It smelled like mildew and copper, because Lyra's fingers had been bleeding into the thread for 11 hours straight. The Moonthread was harvested only during the 3 nights of the full moon, hand-drawn from the spinnerets of lunar moths that nested in the silver birch groves north of Ashen Moor. To spin it fine enough for armor weaving, you had to pull it through a bone needle eye no wider than a hair. The thread cut. It always cut. The sighted weavers wore thimbles. Lyra could not afford thimbles because thimbles cost 1/4 silver, and Hester paid her nothing. "She is finishing the last commission," Hester said. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had decided it was simply business. "The chest plate for Commander Aldrich." "Commander Aldrich is dead," Serafina said. "Arrow through the throat at Black Hollow Ridge. They are bringing the body back with the king's party." A pause. The click of her buckles as she shifted her weight. So the blind rat that has been bleeding into a dead man's armor. How fitting. Lyra's hands stopped. The shuttle hung motionless between the warp threads. Commander Aldrich had been the only officer who left her a bread roll outside the cellar door on inspection days. He never said anything. She only knew it was because the bread always smelled faintly of the pine resin he used on his sword grip. "Well," Hester said, and Lyra heard the calculation in that single syllable. "The weave is nearly complete. We will reassign it." The Alpha King himself lost 2 pieces of armor in the battle. His attendants have been requisitioning replacements from every weaver in the territory. "You want to send the blind Omega's work to the Alpha King?" Serafina's tone had the particular brightness of someone who has just been handed an opportunity for cruelty and is deciding how best to unwrap it. "That is either very bold or very stupid, Hester. The king's quartermaster does not ask who made the weave. He asks if the weave holds. This one holds." Serafina laughed. It was a short, percussive sound. "If it does not hold, and the king takes an arrow through your patchwork charity project, they will execute the weaver. You know that." Then the blind rat had better make sure every thread is perfect, Hester said. They went back up the stairs. Hester's dragging heel, Seraphina's decorative buckles. The door closed. The bolt slid home from the outside, because the cellar locked from the outside, because Lyra was not trusted with freedom of movement after the incident where she had wandered into the pack-house kitchen and accidentally revealed that she could sense where every person in the room was standing without seeing them. The pack elders had called it unnatural. Hester had called it useful and put her to work. Lyra sat in the dark that was indistinguishable from her permanent dark, and pressed her bleeding fingertips together. The moonthread hummed against her palms where it lay across the loom. She could feel the pattern she had woven, every intersection, every density change. The chest plate was designed to absorb the kinetic force of impact and distribute it across the entire surface. Standard armor cloth did this adequately. Lyra's weave did something else, something she did not fully understand and had never told anyone about. When her blood soaked into the moon thread, the weave became responsive. It tightened at the point of impact before contact was made, as if it could feel the arrow coming. She had discovered this by accident 6 months ago, when a drunk guard had thrown a bottle at her in the courtyard, and the scrap of moon thread she had been carrying had snapped rigid in her hand and deflected the glass. She told no one. In Ashen Moor, Omega talents were not celebrated. They were harvested until the Omega was empty and then discarded. 4 hours. The Alpha King of the Ironmoor pack was coming, and his armor requisition would go through Hester, and Hester would send Lyra's weave, and if the weave failed, Lyra would die. If the weave held, Hester would collect the payment, and Lyra would get a bread roll, maybe, if anyone remembered to leave one now that Commander Aldrich was dead. She picked up the shuttle. The needle found the next thread. The thread found her finger. Her blood found the weave. She worked. The horns sounded again, 2 hours later. Closer. The Ironmoor war party was at the outer gates. Lyra felt the vibration of hooves and heavy boots through the cellar floor. Hundreds of wolves in human form, moving in disciplined formation. The cellar sat beneath the quartermaster's storehouse at the eastern edge of the Ashen Moor compound, and the returning army would pass directly overhead on the main road. She felt something else, too. A pull. A vibration that had nothing to do with the moon thread or the marching boots. It started in her sternum, a tightness like a fist closing around the bone, and then it radiated outward through her ribs and down her arms to her fingertips, which were still intertwined with the loom. The moon thread sang. Not hummed. Sang. A single sustained note that made the warp threads vibrate visibly, though Lyra could not see them vibrate. She could feel it. Every thread on the loom was resonating with something above her, something approaching on the road, something that made her wolf, dormant and silent for 3 years, open one eye in the dark interior of her mind, and exhale. Mate. The word arrived in Lyra's consciousness, like a stone dropped into still water. It did not come from her rational mind. It came from somewhere underneath, somewhere primal and absolute. Her wolf, who had not spoken since the fever, who the pack healers had declared dead, who Lyra had mourned as the second loss after her sight, rose to her feet inside Lyra's chest and pressed against her ribs from the inside, pressing toward the surface of her skin, pressing toward the road above the cellar, pressing toward whatever was up there, making every thread on the loom sing like a wire in wind. Lyra clutched the edges of the loom. Her pulse was a hammer in her temples. The vibration in her sternum intensified until it was almost pain, a sweet, crushing pressure, like being held too tightly by someone who did not know their own strength. She heard the army halt. Commands shouted in a deep voice, the stamp of boots falling still. And then, closer, a single set of footsteps, not on the road, on the storehouse floor above her. Heavy, deliberate, a body that carried authority in its weight. The footsteps stopped directly above the cellar door. Lyra held her breath. The Moonthread hummed, hummed, hummed. The bolt slid. Not from the inside, where Lyra could not reach it, and not with the familiar scrape of Hester's hand. This was a sharp, decisive motion, metal against metal, pulled with enough force that the bracket groaned. The door opened. Lyra could not see the man standing at the top of the stairs. What she could feel was a wall of heat descending, as if someone had opened a furnace door. The scent came next. Cedar wood smoke and iron filings, and something underneath both of those, something that smelled the way thunder sounds, electric and vast and inevitable. Her wolf pressed so hard against the inside of her ribs that Lyra gasped and gripped the loom frame to keep from falling off her stool. He came down the stairs. Each step compressed the air in the cellar, thickened it, made it harder to breathe. She counted the steps. 12. He was at the bottom. He said nothing for a long time. Long enough that Lyra became aware of her own appearance, the things she could feel even without sight. Her hair matted and unwashed, hanging in tangles she detangled with her fingers once a week. Her dress, which was actually a burlap work smock that Hester had given her 2 years ago, stiff with old sweat and thread dust. Her hands, which were the worst part, cracked and scarred and crusted with dried blood from the Moonthread, nails broken to the quick. She waited for him to speak. She had learned from 3 years of blindness that the person who speaks first in a room with a sighted person is always at a disadvantage. Let them look. Let them assess. Then respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than she expected. Not louder. Lower. It came from deep in his chest, and it carried a resonance that made the Moonthread vibrate in sympathy. Who put you down here? Not a question. An identification of wrongdoing. Lyra's hands tightened on the loom frame. The quartermaster, my lord. I am assigned to the weaving cellar. Assigned. He repeated the word as if tasting something rotten. She heard him move, a half step to the side. He was looking at the loom. She could feel his attention on it, like heat from a lamp held close to skin. This weave, he said. You did this. Yes, my lord, without sight. I knew. She had not told him, had not turned her face toward him, or failed to track his movement. But he knew. Perhaps her eyes gave it away. The fever had left them clouded, a milky film over the dark brown. Her mother had always said looked like creek water over river stones. Yes, my lord. Another silence. She heard his breathing change. Slower. Controlled. The breathing of a man exerting significant effort over something internal. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped further, and there was a texture in it that had not been there before. Something rough and strained, like cloth tearing slowly along a seam. What is your name? Lyra, of no family, Omega of Ashenmoor. Lyra. He said it twice. The second time, something in the cellar shifted. Not the air, not the temperature. The Moonthread on the loom went silent. Dead silent. as if it had been holding its breath with her, and had now exhaled everything it had. She heard him move toward her. 2 steps. He was close enough that the heat of his body reached her face, and the cedar wood and iron scent was so dense she could taste it on the back of her tongue. She felt his hand come up. She did not flinch, though every instinct from 3 years of casual violence told her to. His fingers, calloused and warm and enormous, touched the side of her jaw and turned her face up toward his. I was looking at her clouded eyes. She knew this because his breath fell directly on her forehead, which meant he was tall, much taller than her, and looking down. "Who hurt your hands?" he said. "The thread, my lord. Moonthread cuts. It is the nature of the material." "You have no thimbles." "No, my lord." His thumb moved once, slowly, across the line of her jaw. "You are the one," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Not from weakness, but from the force of holding something back, the way a dam cracks not from age, but from the weight of what it contains. Lyra did not understand. She opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but her wolf answered before she could. Her wolf, silent for 3 years, threw back her head inside Lyra's mind and howled. The sound was not audible. It was felt. It traveled through Lyra's bones and into her fingers, and into the moon thread on the loom, and the entire weave pulsed once, a single heartbeat of light that Lyra could not see, but that the Alpha King could, because she heard his sharp intake of breath and felt his hand tighten, just slightly, on her jaw. "You do not know what you are," he said. "I am an Omega, my lord, blind, a weaver. You are my mate." The words fell into the cellar like a blade dropped point first into wood. They stood there, quivering. Lyra's first instinct was not joy. It was terror. She had lived in Ashen Moor long enough to know what happened to Omegas who attracted the attention of powerful wolves. They were used, consumed, displayed as trophies of conquest, and when the novelty faded, they were returned to their cellars, now with a mark on their neck and an infant in their belly, and even less standing than before, because a rejected mate was lower than an unmated Omega in the pack hierarchy. "My lord," she said carefully, "I think the cellar air has affected your senses. Moonthread fumes can cause disorientation." He laughed. It was not a cruel laugh or a mocking one. It was the startled, genuine sound of a man who had not expected to laugh and could not prevent it. "Moonthread fumes," he repeated. "Is that what this is?" "It would be the logical explanation, my lord, the logical explanation." His hand was still on her jaw. His thumb had not stopped its slow movement. "My wolf has not slept in 4 years. He has run continuously, inside my mind, searching. He has driven me through 4 kingdoms, and a war that I did not need to fight, chasing a scent I could not name. 3 minutes ago he lay down. For the first time in 4 years, he is still. And you are telling me this is fumes." Lyra swallowed. "I am telling you that I am a blind Omega with no family, no wolf that speaks, no standing, and no value to a king. Whatever your wolf senses, my lord, it would be a cruelty to act on it." His hand left her jaw. She felt the withdrawal of his heat, like a door closing on winter. For a moment, she thought she had succeeded, that she had talked the Alpha King out of a mate bond, which was like talking the tide out of coming in, but which she had attempted because Lyra had survived 3 years of blindness and poverty by being practical above all things. Then he said very quietly, Bring me the quartermaster. This was not directed at Lyra. She heard a rustle of movement at the top of the stairs. Someone else had been there the whole time. Multiple someones, from the sound of the boots. Guards. They left quickly. The Alpha King sat down. She heard the creak of something taking significant weight. He had found the broken chair in the corner, the one with the uneven legs that Lyra used as a yarn rest. He sat in it without comment. He said nothing else. He simply sat in her cellar, in the dark and damp that smelled of mildew and blood copper, and waited. Lyra turned back to her loom. The moonthread was still silent under her fingers, but it was warm now. Warmer than it had ever been, as if the blood she had woven into it had started circulating. The chest plate, she said, because she did not know what else to say. They told me it was being reassigned to you, was it? Commander Aldrich is dead. It was originally for him. A pause. Aldrich, the king said. The single name carried weight. He was a good man. He left bread for me, Lyra said, and then wished she had not, because it sounded pathetic. A grown woman, grateful for bread. Then he was a better man than I knew. Another pause. You are making my armor. Apparently, with your bare hands, no thimbles, in a locked cellar. The bolt is a precaution. I tend to wander. You tend to wander. She could hear him processing this, cataloguing the details, assembling a picture of her life that was, she suspected, significantly more accurate than anything Hester would have described. How long have you been down here? 2 years. Since the quartermaster discovered I could weave moonthread without sight. And before that, the kitchens. Before that, the stables. Before that, the pack house as a general servant. Before that, my mother was alive, and I had eyes and a wolf, and none of the rest of this had happened. She said it flatly. Not for pity. She had burned through self-pity in the first 6 months, and what remained was a dry, clean assessment of facts. She was blind, poor, packless in all ways that mattered, and sitting 3 feet from a man whose single exhale could rearrange her entire existence, which was precisely why she needed him to leave. I did not leave. Hester arrived 12 minutes later. Lyra counted. The quartermaster's heel dragged on the stairs. Her breathing was different, faster, with the particular catch of a woman who has just been told the Alpha King of the Ironmore pack is sitting in her cellar and wants to speak with her. Your Majesty. Hester's voice had shed its pragmatic flatness and acquired the careful warmth of someone addressing a client who could have her executed. I apologize for the state of the workspace. The Omega is, we provide what we can, given the limitations of the supply chain. The limitations of the supply chain, the king repeated. He seemed to enjoy repeating people's euphemisms back to them in a tone that removed all euphemism. Tell me about the supply chain that results in a blind woman weaving without thimbles in a locked cellar. She is an Omega, Your Majesty. Her needs are, she is fed. When was her last meal? Silence. Lyra could have answered. Yesterday morning, a half bowl of barley porridge left outside the cellar door, cold, with a skin forming on top that she had peeled off and eaten separately because it had more substance than the liquid beneath it. But she said nothing, because Hester was her source of food and shelter, and the only person standing between Lyra and the pack dump where unclaimed Omegas were left to fend for themselves. I will need to check the records, Hester said. The king stood. The broken chair groaned in relief. You will not need to check the records. You will need to explain to me why the finest moonthread weave I have ever seen is being produced by a starving, bleeding, locked woman in your cellar, And you will need to make that explanation quickly, because my wolf is suggesting that the fastest resolution involves your throat." Hester made a sound, a small one. Lyra had never heard the quartermaster frightened before. The woman had weathered supply shortages, pack disputes, and a war with bureaucratic impassivity. But the sound she made now was the sound of a person who has suddenly understood that the ground she is standing on is not ground at all, but the surface of something sleeping. "She is pack property, Your Majesty. Unclaimed Omega. The work assignment was approved by Alpha Geron himself. Alpha Geron answers to me. Every Alpha in the Northern Territories answers to me. I approved no work assignment that involves locking a person in a cellar. With respect, Your Majesty, she is Omega. The protocols for Omega labor allocation are handled at the pack level. It is not customary for the Crown to intervene in internal pack management of lower rank members." A silence. It stretched. Lyra felt the temperature in the cellar drop, which made no sense because the king's body heat had been warming the air since he arrived. Then she understood. The cold was not physical. It was the psychic pressure of an Alpha King's aura being deployed with precision, the invisible weight of dominance that could bring a lower rank wolf to their knees. Hester's breathing stuttered, hitched, and then Lyra heard the quartermaster's knees hit the stone floor. "She is not your property," the king said. His voice was level, almost conversational. "She is not pack property. She is not an allocation. She is my mate, and you have been starving her." Silence. Then Hester, from the floor, in a voice stripped of all pretense, said, "I did not know." "Would it have mattered?" Another silence. And then Hester said something that Lyra did not expect. "No," the quartermaster said. "No. It would not have mattered. She produces the best weave I have ever handled, and I would have kept her in that cellar regardless, because her work was making me wealthy, and I did not care about the cost to her. I am telling you the truth, because you will know if I lie, and at least this way I die with the bones of my honesty intact." The king said nothing for a moment. Then, "Get up." Hester rose. Lyra heard the shuffle of her getting to her feet, the drag of her bad knee. "You will not die today," the king said, "not because you deserve mercy, but because killing you now would frighten the Omega you have been caging, and I will not have her more frightened than she already is. You will transfer all records of her work, every commission, every payment you received for her weave, to my quartermaster by nightfall, and you will never come near her again." Hester left. Her footsteps on the stairs were slower than usual. The drag of her heel was more pronounced. At the top she paused. "The chest plate," she said. "It is nearly finished. It truly is the finest work I have ever handled. I was not lying about that." The king did not respond. Hester closed the door behind her. She did not slide the bolt. Lyra sat at her loom. Her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, or the hunger, or the bleeding. From something she had not felt in 3 years. Someone had walked into her cellar, seen the shape of her captivity, and called it by its name. Not kindness, not charity. Just the clean, brutal acknowledgement that what had been done to her was wrong, spoken by a man with the power to enforce the distinction. "I am going to pick you up now," the king said. "I beg your pardon. You have been sitting on that stool for what I estimate is 12 hours. You are malnourished. Your hands are injured. The cellar is 40 degrees and damp. I am going to pick you up and carry you out of here, and then you are going to eat something, And then we are going to have a conversation about what you are, because you are not simply an omega, and we both know it. We do not both know it. I am an omega. That is the beginning and the end. Your weave is infused with blood magic. The Moonthread is responding to your wolf. Your wolf, which you told me does not speak, just howled loudly enough to make every thread on that loom pulse with light. I can see the residue of power in the weave from here, Lyra. It is not subtle. She had no response. She had spent 3 years carefully concealing every manifestation of whatever the fever had left behind when it took her sight. The ability to sense bodies in a room, the Moonthread responding to her blood, the way her wolf, supposedly dead, stirred in moments of extreme emotion and sent ripples of energy through whatever Lyra was touching. She had hidden these things because she had seen, before she lost her sight, what happened to omegas with anomalous abilities in Ashenmoor. They were studied, tested, drained, bred if the ability was heritable. I am an omega, she said again, quieter. You are my mate, he said, matching her quiet. And I am not asking you to be anything you are not. I am asking you to let me take you out of this cellar. Everything else can wait. He crossed the remaining distance between them. She felt his arms come around her, one behind her back and one under her knees, and he lifted her as if she weighed no more than the Moonthread on her loom. She was pressed against his chest and through the leather of his battle armor. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and slow and sure, the heartbeat of a man who had decided something and would not be undecided. He smelled like cedar wood and iron and that electric thunderstorm scent underneath, and his arms were warm. And Lyra, who had not been held by another person since her mother died, felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. Crack. The way ice cracks on a river in the first days of spring. Not shattered, but no longer solid, no longer sealed. She did not cry. She pressed her face into the leather over his collarbone and breathed, and her wolf inside her lay down beside his wolf, wherever it was, and was still. He carried her up 12 stairs and into the light she could not see. The Ironmoor King's name was Kyle. Lyra learned this not from him directly, but from the cascade of people who materialized around them the moment he emerged from the storehouse, carrying a filthy, bleeding, blind omega in his arms. She heard the name in gasps, in whispered conferences, in the sharp commands his officers issued to clear a path. King Kyle, the healers are set up in the East Wing. King Kyle, Alpha Jaren is requesting an audience regarding the supply inventory. King Kyle, the prisoner transport from Black Hollow is, Your Majesty. Is that a person you are carrying? Yes, Kyle said without slowing. She is a person I am carrying. Continue. I took her to a room that smelled of wood smoke and soap and dried lavender. A fire was burning. The heat of it reached her face from across the room, and after 2 years of cellar cold, the sensation was so intense it registered as pain before her body recalibrated and accepted it as warmth. He set her down on something soft, a bed. She had not sat on a mattress since the stables. Stay, he said, and then, as if hearing his own word and finding it inadequate, please. He left. She heard him in the corridor, issuing commands with the economy of a man who had been issuing commands since before his voice changed. Food, hot water, clean clothing. The pack healer, specifically the one who dealt with malnutrition cases, not the one who set bones. And thimbles. He said thimbles twice. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed and held her hands in her lap. Her fingers throbbed. The moonthread cuts were deep in some places. The skin split along grooves that had been reopened so many times they no longer fully closed. She could feel the ridges of scar tissue across her fingertips, each one a map of a completed commission, a piece of armor that had gone out into the world, bearing trace amounts of her blood and her power and her pain. She thought about the chest plate on the loom, unfinished. 4 hours of work remaining, intended for a dead man, reassigned to a king who was apparently her mate, which was either a miracle or a catastrophe. And Lyra had lived long enough in Ashenmoor to know that miracles and catastrophes were often the same event viewed from different moments in time. Her wolf stirred. Not the dramatic howl from the cellar, just a gentle press against her ribs. A sensation like a cat leaning into a palm. Present, awake. For 3 years, Lyra had lived with the absence of her wolf like a phantom limb, always reaching for something that was not there. Now the wolf was there, faint, weak, but there, and oriented with absolute certainty toward the door through which Kael had left. He returned with people. The healer was a brisk woman named Maren, who smelled like calendula salve and did not comment on Lyra's condition, except to say quietly to someone, "Tell the king she has not eaten properly in weeks. The muscle wasting is significant." The food came next. Broth first, because Maren would not allow solid food until Lyra's stomach had something gentle to work with. The broth was chicken, with rosemary and a trace of garlic, and it was the most complex flavor Lyra had tasted in months. She drank it slowly, her hands wrapped around the warm clay bowl, and tried not to shake. Kael sat across from her. She could feel his attention the way she could feel the fire, constant and warm and almost unbearable. He did not speak while she ate. He did not speak while Maren cleaned and bandaged her hands. He did not speak while a woman, whose voice Lyra did not recognize, helped her out of the burlap smock and into a cotton shift that felt against her skin like water. When everyone had left, he said, "How long since your wolf last spoke to you before today?" 3 years, since the fever. The fever that took your sight. Yes. What was the fever? Lyra hesitated. This was the part she had never discussed with anyone. The pack healer at the time, an elderly wolf named Corvin, had examined her after the fever broke and said nothing to her directly. He had spoken to Alpha-Geron. The conversation had taken place in the next room, and Lyra, newly blind, had discovered that her hearing had sharpened to compensate for her lost sight and could hear every word through the wall. Corvin had said, the fever was not an illness, it was a transition. The girl's wolf is not dead, it is metamorphosing. What emerges will not be a standard Omega wolf. Alpha-Geron had said, what will it be? Corvin had said, I do not know, but the blood markers are consistent with the old lines, the silver vein lines. Alpha-Geron had said nothing for a long time. Then, the silver veins are extinct. Apparently not. The girl's mother, what was her name? Elara. She came to Ashen Moor 8 years ago with the child. No mate, no pack affiliation. She said she was a wanderer named Elara, with silver vein blood markers. Alpha-Geron's voice had the careful tone of a man looking at a problem and deciding how much of it needed to disappear. Corvin, this stays between us. The girl is Omega. She stays Omega. If her wolf changes, you will tell me, and I will handle it. The silver vein bloodline is not something I want attracting attention to my pack. Corvin had agreed. He died 4 months later. Heart failure, the pack announced. Lyra had always wondered, She told Kael none of this. What she said was, it was a high fever. Common enough. It took my sight and my wolf went quiet. The pack healer said these things happen to Omegas sometimes. The pack healer lied, Kael said. Lyra's hands tightened on the clay bowl. You do not know that. I know what silver vein blood smells like. My grandmother was one. She died when I was 7. But I spent enough time in her lap to remember the scent of her skin. Cedar and lightning. Your blood on that loom smells the same. The bowl in her hands went very still. You know about the silver veins. I know they were a bloodline of weavers who could infuse organic material with protective magic through blood contact. I know they were hunted to extinction 3 generations ago by packs who wanted to control the bloodline for military advantage. I know the last known silver vein was a woman named Elara, who disappeared from the Northern Registry 20 years ago and was never found. Lyra set the bowl down. My mother's name was Elara. Yes, she never told me she was protecting you. She protected me into a cellar. She protected you into survival. The alternative was being found by the packs that hunted her line. The alternative was being bred like livestock for your blood. She hid you in the lowest possible status in the most unremarkable pack she could find. An Omega with no wolf and no sight. Invisible. Lyra's throat closed. Not from tears. From the sudden, vertiginous reorientation of understanding her own life from a different angle. Her mother had not drifted to Ashenmoor out of aimlessness. She had chosen it. The smallest, dullest pack in the Northern Territories. A place no one of importance would look. And when the fever came and took Lyra's sight, it had not been a tragedy. It had been a cocoon. The metamorphosis Corvin had described. Her wolf was not dead. Her wolf was changing into something that would, when it emerged, mark her as the last of a bloodline that powerful wolves had killed to control. I need you to understand something, Kael said. His voice had lost the commanding edge. What remained was lower, rawer, the voice of a man speaking without the armor of authority. I did not come to Ashenmoor looking for a silver vein. I did not come looking for a mate. I came because I fought a battle at Black Hollow Ridge 3 days ago, and during that battle I took an arrow to the chest that should have killed me, and the arrow did not pierce my armor. The armor I was wearing was standard issue, nothing special, but the inner lining had been replaced 2 months ago by my quartermaster with a Moonthread weave sourced from an anonymous supplier in the Northern Territories. I felt the arrow hit. I felt the weave tighten around it, catch it, hold it, distribute the force like a hand pressing flat against my chest. The arrow fell away. I looked down and the weave was glowing faintly pink, the color of blood diluted in water. And I thought, someone's hands are in this cloth. Someone's life is woven into this armor, and I need to find them. Lyra's bandaged hands were trembling. The earlier commissions, the ones Hester sold, you were wearing one. I was wearing several. Your weave has been cycling through Ironmoor's elite guard for over a year. My quartermaster has been buying it from Hester at premium prices. None of us knew who was making it. We knew only that the armor held in ways that standard Moonthread did not, in ways that were impossible. You tracked the source. I tracked the source, through the quartermaster chain, through 3 middlemen, to Hester Hall, to Ashenmoor, or to a locked cellar under a storehouse, to you. Lyra pressed her bandaged fingers together. The cuts stung beneath the wrapping. Her blood, her silver vein blood, had been going out into the world for a year, woven into armor that protected strangers, protected soldiers, protected the king, whose wolf now lay quiet for the first time in 4 years because he was sitting 3 feet from the woman whose blood had been keeping him alive without her knowledge. "The arrow at Black Hollow," she said. "You felt nothing?" "I felt the impact. I did not feel the pierce. Your weave absorbed it entirely." "Then it works." She said it to herself, not to him. A confirmation of something she had suspected, but never verified. The blood-infused weave was not simply stiffer or denser. It was anticipatory. It responded to threat before contact. It protected. "It works," Kael confirmed. "And it has been working, silently, from a cellar in a pack that locked you in the dark and forgot to feed you. You have been saving lives you did not know existed with hands that no one bothered to bandage." "I did not know any of this." "I know. I thought I was making cloth." "You were making shields." He paused. "You were making them with your own blood, at cost to your own body, and receiving nothing in return. That changes now. My lord." "Kael, King Kael, I appreciate the intervention. Truly. But you must understand my position. If I am what you say, if the Silver Vein bloodline is real and I carry it, then I am a target. I have been hidden for 20 years. If you claim me publicly as your mate, every pack that ever hunted the Silver Veins will know where to find the last one. Let them come." That is the response of a man who has never been hunted. A sharp silence. When he spoke, his voice was different, measured, acknowledging. "That is fair. You are right." That was the response of a man who has an army at his back and has never been alone and powerless. "I cannot promise that my instinct to protect you through force is always the correct strategy. But I can promise that your safety is not something I will compromise for pride or display. If you need to stay hidden, we find a way to keep you hidden. If the weave continues in secret, we build the infrastructure to protect its source. But you do not go back to the cellar. That is not a negotiable point." Lyra considered this. Her wolf pressed gently against her ribs, oriented toward him. And for the first time in 3 years, the wolf's presence felt less like a phantom limb and more like a compass. "I need to finish the chest plate," she said. "What?" "The weave on the loom. It is 4 hours from completion. It was meant for Commander Aldrich, then reassigned to you. It is the most complex piece I have ever done. The blood infusion is deeper than anything in the earlier commissions. If I do not finish it, the Moonthread will degrade. It has to be completed during the same lunar cycle it was started, or the weave collapses. You want to go back to the cellar. I want to finish my work, preferably with thimbles." I was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh compressed into an exhale. "I ordered thimbles. I heard. You will finish the chest plate, but not in the cellar. The loom can be moved. The loom weighs 300 pounds and is calibrated to the specific humidity of the cellar environment. Moving it will detune the warp threads, and I will have to recalibrate by feel, which will add 2 hours to the timeline. Then I will sit in the cellar with you while you work. You are a king. I am a man whose mate is in a cellar. The cellar is where I will be." He said it simply. Without drama, without the possessive growl that alpha wolves typically deployed when establishing claim. Just a statement of physical intention. Where she was, he would be. It was, Lyra thought, the most unsettling thing anyone had ever said to her, because it left no room for argument and required no response. They went back to the cellar. Kael carried the thimbles himself, 4 of them, sized for fingers, slightly larger than hers, because that was what the quartermaster had on hand. Lyra put them on. The leather was stiff and new, and they slipped slightly on her smaller fingers, but they covered the worst of the cuts, and when she ran the moon thread through the needle eye, for the first time in months, she did not bleed. She wove. He sat in the broken chair and watched her, and she could feel him watching her the way she could feel everything in the cellar, with the heightened awareness of a blind woman whose other senses had been recalibrated by loss. She heard his breathing slow and steady as the rhythmic movement of the shuttle became a metronome. She heard the moon thread humming again, softly, the vibration gentler now, like a lullaby rather than a cry. She felt his warmth from across the room, steady as the fire she could not see. At one point, she heard his breathing change. A catch, a held breath, then release. "What is it?" she said, not pausing in her work. "The weave is glowing." It does that when it responds to proximity. To a wolf it recognizes. It recognizes me. It contains my blood. My blood apparently contains silver vein magic, and you are apparently my mate. So yes, the weave recognizes you. It has been recognizing you for a year. Every piece of armor you wore with my thread in it. It knew you before I did. Silence. Then very quietly. It did not feel like armor. When the arrow hit at Black Hollow, it felt like a hand on my chest, holding me back from harm. I thought I was losing my mind. Lyra's shuttle stopped for one beat, then resumed. That is what it is supposed to feel like. That is what the silver veins did. They did not make armor. They made protection. There is a difference. What is the difference? Armor is passive. It sits there and absorbs impact. Protection is active. It reaches toward the threat. It anticipates. It cares about the body it covers. She paused. At least, that is what my hands tell me when I weave. I have no silver vein training. No one taught me this. My body does it, and I follow. Your body is wiser than any teacher. She did not respond. She wove. The chest plate took shape under her hands, the moon thread humming and warm and alive, in a way it had never been when she wove alone. Kael's presence in the cellar changed the acoustics of the thread, deepened the resonance, as if the armor knew who it was being made for and was adjusting itself accordingly. 3 hours in, the door at the top of the stairs opened. Footsteps, not Hester's, heavier and accompanied by the distinctive clink of decorative sword hilts. Multiple wolves. Official. Your Majesty. A voice Lyra did not recognize. Formal. Tense. Alpha Jeren requests an urgent audience. I is aware of your visit to the quartermaster's cellar and the removal of pack property without consultation. Kael did not stand. Pack property. He refers to the Omega Weaver, Your Majesty. Her name is Lyra. She is not pack property. Relay that to Alpha Jeren. Alpha Jeren is insistent, Your Majesty. He invokes territorial pack rights under the Northern Accord. The Omega is Ashenmoor pack registered. Any reassignment or claim requires Alpha to Alpha negotiation. Kael stood. The chair groaned. Tell Alpha Jeren I will meet him in the Great Hall in 20 minutes, and tell him to bring his charter documents, because I intend to review every Omega labor allocation in Ashenmoor's records. Every one. The officers left. Kael's hand found Lyra's shoulder. His touch was brief, a press of warmth and then release. I will be back. Alpha Jeren is not a man you should underestimate, Lyra said. You know him well. I have lived under his authority for 8 years. He is not cruel the way Hester was cruel, for profit or indifference. He is cruel the way a farmer is cruel to livestock. He sees nothing wrong with it, because he does not see the livestock as subjects of their own experience. He genuinely believes omegas are resources. It is not malice. It is conviction. And conviction is harder to argue with than malice. Cale was silent for a moment. You have thought about this. I have had 3 years in a dark cellar with nothing to do but think. Your assessment is noted. Another brief press of his hand on her shoulder. Finish the chest plate. He left, she wove. The meeting between Kyle and Alpha Geron took place in Ashenmoor's Great Hall, a timber and stone structure that smelled, according to every report Lyra had ever heard, of old smoke and boar fat, and the particular must of wolf fur that accumulated in any space where pack gatherings occurred. Lyra was not present. She learned what happened from Maren, the healer, who came to check her hands 2 hours later, and who was, as it turned out, Kyle's personal physician, and not a woman inclined to purr details. Alpha Geron made his case, Maren said, unwrapping Lyra's bandages with efficient fingers. Territorial pack rights. The Omega was registered at Ashenmoor. No claim can be made without negotiation and compensation. Standard protocol. And the king's response? Lyra asked. The king asked Geron to produce the Omega registry. Geron produced it. The king read it aloud. Every entry, every Omega assigned to labor, their task, their compensation, their living conditions. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, 3 of Geron's own council members were looking at the floor. Maren paused, her fingers stilled on Lyra's hand. There was a moment, she said, and her voice lost its clinical distance. When Geron was defending the cellar assignment, he said, and I am quoting, that the Omega's blindness made her unsuitable for above-ground labor, and that the cellar was, in his words, an accommodation for her disability. The king said nothing. He simply placed the thimbles on the table. The ones he had brought you. They were spotted with your blood from the 3 hours of weaving you had done. He said, these are the first thimbles she has owned. She has been weaving Moonthread with bare hands for 2 years. Is this also an accommodation? Lyra's chest tightened. What did Geron do? He looked at the thimbles for a long time. Then he said something I did not expect. He said, I did not know about the thimbles. Hester managed the weaving program. I approved the assignment, but not the conditions. Maren resumed unwrapping. I believe him. Geron is not a man who concerns himself with details below his station. He approved an Omega for labor. He did not check whether that Omega had proper tools. He did not check whether she was fed. He did not check because she was below his threshold of attention, and that, in its way, is worse than intentional cruelty, because it requires no effort and no awareness. He was not even aware of his own negligence. What happened after? The king invoked Crown oversight. Ashenmoor's Omega labor program is under review. Geron's authority over unclaimed Omegas is suspended pending audit, and you are officially transferred to the Ironmoor Pack under the king's direct protection. Maren finished the bandaging. Clean wraps this time, with a calendula salve underneath that made the cuts sting less. There is also the matter of the mate bond. What about it? Geron challenged it. He said that Alpha King mate bonds require ratification by the Pack Council, and that an Omega of unknown lineage, particularly a blind one, was an unsuitable match for the crown. And the king's wolf surfaced. Maren's voice went very flat. the flatness of a medical professional describing something they would prefer not to have witnessed. Not a full shift, a partial manifestation. The eyes changed, the voice changed, and every wolf in that hall, including Geren's personal guard, submitted. Belly up, on the floor. Geren lasted 4 seconds longer than anyone else. Then he went down too. The king forced submission. The king's wolf forced submission, because someone suggested that his mate was unsuitable. I have traveled with Kael for 6 years. I have never seen his wolf manifest in a political meeting. His control is legendary. What I saw was not a loss of control. It was a declaration. His wolf was saying, in the only language wolves understand, that the bond was not a subject for debate. Lyra sat with this. The moonthread on the loom behind her hummed softly in the silence. "Is he angry?" she asked. Maren paused. "No, he is frightened. The Alpha King is frightened. He found his mate in a cellar, starving, bleeding, and locked in the dark. He is terrified that if he looks away for 5 minutes, someone will put you back there. That is not anger, Lyra. That is the fear of a man who has found something he cannot afford to lose and has no framework for the vulnerability that creates." Maren left. Lyra turned back to the loom. The chest plate was nearly done. 1 more hour. Her hands moved through the weave with a fluency that was, she understood now, not simply skill, but bloodline. The silver veins had woven into cloth for generations. Not armor. Protection. The distinction she had articulated to Kael was real. The thread did not simply block. It responded. It anticipated. It hauled. Her blood was in this cloth. Her silver vein blood, singing through the moon thread in patterns she could feel but not see. Patterns that resonated with the heartbeat of the man the weave was made for. She had bled into his armor for a year without knowing his name. She had kept him alive at Black Hollow Ridge from a cellar in Ashenmoor, her torn fingers threading magic through cloth while he fought on the other side of the kingdom, unaware that the hand pressed against his chest was hers. She finished the chest plate as the moon rose. She could not see the moon, but she felt it. A tidal pull in her blood that crested and then settled as the last thread was tied. The weave on the loom pulsed once softly and went still. Complete. Kael came back. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavier now, the weight of a man who had spent hours in political confrontation and had the particular fatigue of someone who had exercised power he would have preferred not to deploy. He sat in the broken chair. "It is finished. It is finished. How does it feel?" She ran her bandaged hands across the surface of the completed chest plate. Under the wrappings and the calendula salve, her cuts pulsed in time with the weave. "It feels alive," she said, "more than any piece I have made. The blood integration is deeper. I think it is because you were here. Because the bond, whatever it is, allowed the weave to calibrate to you specifically. Previous commissions went to unknown wearers. This one knows who it belongs to." I was quiet for a moment. "May I touch it?" "It is yours." He rose. She felt him approach the loom. His hand came down on the chest plate, and she heard the breath leave him, a slow, shuddering exhale, as if someone had laid a cool compress on a burn he had been carrying for years. "It is warm," he said. "Your body temperature is naturally higher than average. The weave is matching it. It does not feel like cloth." "What does it feel like?" I was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then, "It feels like your hand on my chest." Lyra's breath caught. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, gentle and certain. "We should talk about what happens next," she said. "You come to Ironmoor. I am blind, I am an Omega. Your court will not accept me. My court will accept what I tell them to accept. And when they learn about the Silver Vein bloodline, when the packs that hunted my mother's line come to Ironmoor, then they will find an army, a king who does not negotiate with hunters, and a woman whose weave can stop an arrow at close range. I am not dismissing your concern, Lyra. I understand the danger, but the alternative is hiding you in another cellar for the rest of your life. And I have just pulled you out of one. I will not participate in building another. You could claim me in secret. No public declaration. The weave continues anonymously. The Silver Vein bloodline stays hidden. No. Why? Because a secret mate is a hidden mate, and a hidden mate can be disappeared. If Ashenmoor taught you anything, it should be that invisibility is not safety. It is vulnerability without witnesses. A public claim means that every wolf in the kingdom knows you are mine, and any hand raised against you is raised against the crown. Lyra considered this. She was terrified. It was a specific, sharp terror, different from the dull, grinding fear of the cellar. The cellar fear was chronic, ambient, the background radiation of a life lived under contempt. This fear was acute. This fear was the fear of being seen, of being known, of stepping out of the dark she had adapted to and into a world of light she could not see, where people would look at her clouded eyes and her scarred hands and measure her against every expectation of what a queen should be. "I cannot see," she said. "I cannot see your face. I do not know what you look like." "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. Every person in your kingdom will look at me and see a blind Omega. They will make judgments based on sight. I cannot make judgments based on sight. I will be navigating your court by sound and scent and touch, and there will be 1,000 moments where that difference makes me appear weak or foolish or incapable. And you need me to believe that your people will accept me despite that." His hand found hers in the dark. He lifted it, turned it palm up, and pressed it to his face. "Here," he said. "See?" She did. Her fingertips, bandaged and aching, traced the landscape of his features. His jaw was wider than she expected, the bone heavy and squared, stubbled with growth that rasped against the cotton wrapping on her fingers. His nose had been broken and healed slightly crooked. There was a scar that ran from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, a raised ridge of tissue that her fingers followed like a seam in the earth. His cheekbones were sharp beneath skin that felt weathered, wind-rough, the skin of a man who spent his life outdoors in hard weather. His brow was a shelf above his eyes, protective, permanent. His eyes, when her fingers passed over his closed lids, moved beneath her touch. I was not beautiful. She could tell this the way she could tell the quality of a weave by touch, not by the presence of something perfect, but by the integrity of the whole. His face was a face that had been used. It had taken impact. It had healed. It had hardened in the places that needed hardening, and remained somehow warm in the places where warmth was required. "Your scar," she said. "This one." She traced the ridge from temple to mouth. "When?" "Battle of the Grey Fens. 3 years ago. A cursed blade. Standard healing did not take. The scar remains. 3 years ago, the same year I lost my sight." "Yes." She left her hand on his face. His hand came up and covered hers, pressing her palm flat against his scarred cheek. They stood like that in the cellar, in the dark that was equally dark for both of them now, because neither was looking at the other with their eyes, and the moonthread on the loom hummed one last time, a soft, resonant note, and fell silent. The chest plate moved from the loom to Kael's quarters the next morning. Lyra did not return to the cellar. She was given a room adjacent to the healer's station, a small space that smelled of clean linen and beeswax candles, with a window she could feel the sun through, even if she could not see it. Maren checked her hands morning and evening. The cuts were healing. The calendula salve and the absence of constant reopening allowed the skin to begin closing properly for the first time in months. The Ashen Moor pack watched her ascent, with the particular discomfort of a community confronting the consequences of its own indifference. Lyra moved through the compound on Maren's arm, and the wolves she passed fell into uncomfortable silence, the silence of people who had walked past a locked cellar door every day for 2 years, without once asking what was behind it. They had not been cruel. Most of them had not even known she was there. And that was the point, was it not? The cruelty of a system that makes certain people invisible requires no individual malice. It requires only that no one looks. Serafina looked. Serafina found Lyra on the second morning, seated in the courtyard garden, where Maren had positioned her in a patch of sun, with instructions to let the warmth work on her depleted vitamin stores. Lyra heard the buckles before the voice. Well, the blind rat climbed out of the cellar and landed on a throne. I would be impressed if it were not so nauseating, Serafina. You know, I warned Hester about you. I told her to send your weave through a different distribution chain, one that would not be traceable. She was greedy. She wanted the Iron Moor premium. And now the Alpha King thinks he has found his mate in the Omega cellar, and Hester is under audit, and Geren is on probation, and the entire pack is scrambling because you, little blind Omega, turned out to be interesting. Lyra said nothing. She turned her face toward the sun and let its warmth settle on her closed eyelids. You are going to destroy this pack, Serafina said. Her voice shifted. The cloying sweetness had dried up, and what was underneath was something raw and tight. I am not saying that to be cruel. I am saying it because I grew up here. My father built Ashen Moor's defenses. He died protecting this border. And now the Alpha King is tearing through our leadership because one Omega was mistreated, and the fallout is going to leave us without an Alpha, without a council, without protection during an active war. You, who could not see the sky if you tried, are going to bring down everything my father built. Lyra turned toward Serafina's voice. Your father was Beta Vasserin. Yes, he died at the Grey Fens 3 years ago. Yes, the same battle where King Kael received the scar on his face. Silence. When Serafina spoke again, the edge was blunted. My father served under Kael. He respected him. He died taking a blade meant for the king's flank. Then your father and I have something in common. We have both bled for the same man without being asked to. Serafina's buckles clicked. She was shifting weight, deciding something. Then, he is wearing your weave right now. The king. I saw him this morning. The chest plate from your loom. He had it fitted over his formal armor for the council session with Geren. It does not match the rest of his gear. It is lighter in color, and the stitching pattern is different from anything the Iron Moor armories produce. Everyone can see it is not standard issue. Everyone is asking where it came from, and what is he telling them? He is telling them his mate made it with her hands. He says it loud enough for the whole room to hear, and when anyone looks uncomfortable, his wolf surfaces just enough to make the air in the room thicken. He is not a subtle man, your king. He is not my king. He is wearing your blood on his chest and calling you his mate in front of a war council. He is your king, Lyra, whether you have accepted that or not. Seraphina left. Her buckles faded down the garden path. Lyra sat in the sun and felt the warmth on her skin and thought about Seraphina's father dying at the grey fens, taking a blade meant for Kael, and about Seraphina growing up in Ashenmoor without him, watching the pack her father had protected deteriorate into a place that locked blind women in cellars for profit. She thought about the raw edge under Seraphina's cruelty, the grief and anger of a daughter who had lost her father to a king's war, and then watched that same king dismantle her father's legacy over an Omega's bloodied fingers. She did not hate Seraphina. She could not afford to hate anyone. Hatred was a luxury that required surplus emotional energy, and Lyra had been running a deficit for years. The third night, Kael came to her room. Not the cellar. Her room. He knocked, which was itself unusual. Alpha Kings did not knock. "Come in," she said. He entered. She was sitting on the bed, her bandaged hands in her lap. The beeswax candle Maren had left for ambience casting a warmth she could feel on her cheek, but not see. He sat beside her. The bed dipped significantly under his weight. "Jaren has agreed to step down," he said, "voluntarily, in exchange for exile rather than trial. That is merciful. It is pragmatic. A trial would take weeks and destabilize the border during active conflict. Exile removes him from power without creating a martyr. Who replaces him? That is what I came to discuss." Lyra waited. The Ashenmoor Council has 3 viable candidates. None of them are ideal. The pack needs leadership that understands its specific vulnerabilities, its border position, its resource limitations. Leadership that has been inside the system long enough to understand where it failed. You are looking at me. I am looking at you. I am blind. You have been navigating this pack's internal politics by sound and touch for 8 years. You know every corridor, every hierarchy, every pressure point. You knew Garen's character better than his own council did. You described his particular brand of cruelty with a precision that a sighted person embedded in his inner circle could not have matched. I am an Omega. You are a silver vein with dormant alpha line markers in your blood. Maren confirmed it this morning. Your wolf is metamorphosing. When she emerges, she will not be an Omega wolf. The air in the room changed. Lyra's hands tightened in her lap. Maren tested my blood? With your consent. You signed the medical release form yesterday. I signed a piece of paper I could not read. Maren read it to you. Maren read me a summary. She said it was routine blood work. A pause. That is a fair criticism. I will speak with Maren about the scope of disclosure. Do that. Another pause. The blood markers are real, Lyra. You carry dual-line silver vein genetics. Your mother was full-blooded. Your father was, based on the markers, likely from one of the old alpha houses. You are not an Omega by blood. You were registered as one for protection. Lyra pressed her palms together. The bandages rustled. Everything I have been, she said slowly. Everything I have experienced, the cellar, the hierarchy, the way people spoke to me and about me. It was all based on a lie. It was based on a fiction your mother constructed to keep you alive, a fiction that others enforced with locks and starvation and contempt. They believed I was Omega because it was convenient to believe it, because it allowed them to use me without guilt. Yes, and now you are telling me that I am not what they thought, and that changes how they should have treated me. But it should not change how they should have treated me. An Omega locked in a cellar with no thimbles deserves thimbles regardless of her bloodline. Kale was quiet for a long time. You are right, he said finally. You are absolutely right. And I am going to hold that truth alongside the practical reality that the Ashenmoor wolves will accept an alpha-blooded leader more readily than an Omega-1, because the world does not change at the speed of justice. It changes at the speed of what people can be made to accept. I will not pretend that your bloodline does not matter politically. But I will build a system where the question of thimbles does not depend on bloodline. That is the work. That is what Ashenmoor needs. Lyra's wolf stirred inside her. Not the gentle press of recent days. A deeper movement. A stretching, as if something coiled and compacted was beginning to unfurl. She felt it in her spine, a warmth that radiated from the base of her skull down to her tailbone, and in her hands, where the moonthread cuts pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow she could not see, but could feel, a heartbeat in her scars. Something is happening, she said. Your eyes, Kael said. His voice had changed, tight, awed. Your eyes are changing. She could not see herself. She raised her bandaged hands to her face and felt no difference. But the warmth in her spine was intensifying, and her wolf inside her was standing, was growing, was pressing outward with a force that made Lyra's ribs creak. The metamorphosis, she whispered. Corvin said it would happen. The old healer. He said my wolf was not dead, just changing. He said what emerged would be different. Different how? He did not know. He died before I could ask. Lyra, your eyes are silver. The warmth crested. It broke like a wave inside her chest, and her wolf unfurled, and Lyra felt, for the first time in 3 years, the full presence of her wolf consciousness spreading through her body like light filling a room. Not the muted phantom presence of the past days, the full weight, the complete awareness. She could feel Kael's heartbeat from across the bed, could feel the blood moving in his veins, could feel the chemistry of his wolf responding to hers, a call and response pattern that resonated at a frequency below sound, and she could see. Not with her eyes. Her eyes were still clouded, still damaged, still blind. But something else had opened, something behind her eyes, deeper than the optic nerve, older than sight itself. She perceived the room not as an image, but as a field. Heat signatures, electromagnetic contours, the shape of Kael's body limned in the warm gold of his wolf's energy. The outline of the window where moonlight pressed against the glass, silver and liquid. The glow of the beeswax candle, a small sun of organic warmth. And her own hands, in her lap, where the scars from the moonthread pulsed with a faint, living light that she could finally perceive. I can see you, she said. Not with her eyes, with something older and stranger. I can see your wolf. He is Kael. He is enormous. You can see, not the way you see. Not light and color. It is more like I see the heat of things, the energy, the shape of life inside the body. She raised her hands. The scars glowed. My blood, the silver vein blood. It is visible. I can see it in my own scars. Kael's wolf surfaced. She perceived it as a flare of gold light expanding outward from his chest, filling his frame, pressing against the boundaries of his human shape. His eyes, which she could see now as 2 points of molten amber in the warm architecture of his face, were fixed on hers with an intensity that her new perception rendered as heat, literal radiating heat, the focused burn of absolute attention. "Your wolf," he said. "Lyra, your wolf is not an Omega wolf. What is she?" "She is silver." "She is, I do not have a word for what she is. I have never seen a wolf manifestation this color. She is the color of Moonthread." Lyra felt her wolf inside her, fully present, fully unfurled, and understood, with the deep, wordless certainty of blood knowledge, what she was. Not Omega, not Alpha. Something older. The silver veins had not been a bloodline of weavers. They had been a bloodline of protectors, wolves whose entire being was oriented toward the act of shielding, of anticipating harm and interposing between the threat and the threatened. Her weave was not a skill, it was a manifestation, an externalization of what her wolf was built to do. The Moonthread armor was her wolf's instinct made physical, and it had been reaching for Kyle for a year, across distance and ignorance, finding him, covering him, stopping arrows he did not know were coming, pressing against his chest like a hand that would not let him fall. "I was protecting you before I knew you existed," she said. "My wolf found you through the weave. She reached for you in the only way she could, through the thread, through the blood. Every commission that left my cellar, every piece of armor that carried my thread, she was searching for the heartbeat that matched hers." Cale's hand found her face again, both hands this time, cupping her jaw, tilting her face up toward his. Through her new perception, she could see the topography of his expression, the heat patterns of emotion in the muscles of his face, the tightness around his eyes that was fear, the softness at his mouth that was something else, the scar from temple to mouth, which in her heat vision was a cooler line, older tissue, a mark from the same year her sight was taken. "The ceremony," he said, "the mate marking. I want it public. I want it now. Now as in this moment, now as in tonight, before the moon sets, before Geren's people have time to organize, before the border packs hear about the silver vein, before anyone can use delay as a weapon against us. You are proposing a state ceremony with," she gestured at herself, "less than an hour of preparation. I am proposing that I mark you, and you mark me, and anyone who has something to say about the timing can say it to my wolf." Lyra's wolf pressed against her ribs, not in uncertainty, in readiness. "My hair is still matted. I do not care about your hair. Your court will care about my hair. My court will care about the silver light coming out of your eyes, and the fact that the moon thread on the chest plate I am wearing is currently glowing like a signal fire. They will not notice your hair." Lyra almost laughed. The sound surprised her, a broken, rusty thing from somewhere she had not accessed in years. "Bring me a comb and clean bandages. If I am being marked by a king, I am not doing it with dirty wrappings on my hands." He brought her a comb. He brought her clean bandages. He brought Maren, who rewrapped her hands with quick, professional motions, and murmured, "Your wolf energy readings are off every scale I have. When this is over, I need a full panel." He brought a dress, simple and dark, brought from Iron Moore's supplies, that felt like water against Lyra's skin when she put it on. He combed her hair himself, standing behind her, working through tangles with a patience that his battlefield reputation did not suggest he possessed. She felt his hands moving through the dark mass of her hair, felt the gentle pull and release as knots came free, felt his breathing slow with each pass of the comb, as if the repetitive motion was unwinding something in him as well. When her hair hung smooth and loose past her shoulders, he set the comb down and pressed his face into the crown of her head. She felt the heat of his exhale against her scalp. "You smell like moonlight," he said. "You have always smelled like moonlight, even the armor, even through leather and metal and a year of distance. Moonlight and blood." The great hall of Ashenmoor was full. Lyra perceived this not through sight, but through her new awareness. A room crowded with heat signatures, wolf energies ranging from pale yellow to deep orange, all oriented toward the front of the hall where she stood beside Kael. The scent of the room was boar fat and old smoke and wolf musk, exactly as she had been told, but underneath those scents was another layer, the collective emotional temperature of a pack watching something unprecedented. The ceremony was brief. Werewolf mate markings did not require elaborate ritual. They required proximity, intent, and the physical act of the bite. Kael's hand was on the back of her neck. His wolf was at the surface, pressing against his skin, and she could see the gold light of his energy expanding to fill the space between them, merging with the silver of her own wolf until the two colors were intertwined like threads on a loom. "I, Kael of Ironmoor, claim this woman as my mate," he said. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Let every wolf present witness. Let every wolf absent hear. She is mine, and I am hers, and any challenge to this bond is a challenge to the crown." His teeth found the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The bite was sharp, precise, a single clean puncture that sent a bolt of sensation through Lyra's entire body. Not pain exactly, but a depth of feeling that pain could not encompass. She felt the bond lock into place like a key turning in a lock she had not known she possessed. The connection between them, which had been a pull, a vibration, an awareness, solidified into something structural, as if a bridge had been built between their rib cages, and every breath either took now traveled through the other. Then it was her turn. She reached up, found his neck with her bandaged hands, felt the corded muscle and the heat of his pulse, and bit. She had no alpha fangs. She had omega teeth, blunt and human. But her wolf surged forward, and something happened to her jaw. A moment of pressure and growth, and the bite that landed on Kael's neck was neither omega nor alpha. It was silver vein. She felt the skin break and tasted his blood, iron and cedar, and the bond completed. A circuit closing. 2 points of light connecting across a darkness that had kept them apart for years. Kael's wolf howled, not inside his mind, aloud. A sound that started in his chest and erupted from his throat, raw and triumphant, and shaking the timber beams of the great hall. Lyra felt every wolf in the room respond, felt their wolves drop in submission, felt the psychic pressure of Kael's alpha dominance wash through the hall like a wave. And then her wolf answered, a silver howl that was not audible but was felt, a vibration that traveled through the floor and the walls and the armor on every guard's chest and the very air itself, a protective pulse that said, in the wordless language of wolves, I am here, and nothing will harm what I have claimed. The hall was silent after that. The silence of awe, not fear. Lyra stood with Kael's blood on her mouth, and his mark on her neck, and her wolf standing, fully manifested, silver and immense, inside the architecture of her being, and she understood that the cellar was over, not because she had been rescued, not because a king had chosen her, but because the cocoon had opened, and what emerged was not an omega or a victim or a hidden thing, but a wolf who had been weaving protection for years without knowing that the first person she needed to protect was herself. Serafina was in the hall. Lyra felt her heat signature near the back, a distinctive pattern she recognized from the garden, warm but contained, like a fire burning in a closed stove. After the ceremony, after the crowd had pressed forward and then retreated under the combined weight of two wolves who wanted privacy, Serafina approached. Her buckles clicked. Her voice was stripped of its usual coating. "My father's armor," she said. "At the Grey Fens. He was wearing standard issue. No Moonthread. No special weave. Just pack armory plate. That is why the blade went through." Lyra understood what Serafina was saying, and what she was not saying. "I was not weaving yet when your father died. The fever had only just taken my sight. I could not have made armor for him." "I know." Serafina's voice was very tight. "I know you could not have. I am not blaming you. I am saying that if you had been weaving then, if someone had thought to put Moonthread on a beta's armor instead of locking the weaver in a cellar, my father might still be alive." "Serafina, I am angry. I have been angry for 3 years. I was angry at you because you were easy to be angry at. Blind. Quiet. Below me. I could hate you and it cost me nothing." A breath. "But the anger was never about you. It was about a system that decided my father's armor did not matter because he was beta, not alpha. That decided your hands did not matter because you were omega, not ranked. That decides every day who is worth protecting and who is expendable, and I am tired of it." "What do you want, Serafina?" "I want to help rebuild Ashenmore. I want to be on the council. I want to make sure that no one in this pack is ever locked in a cellar again, omega or otherwise. And I want you to teach me about the Moonthread program. Because if your weave can stop an arrow for a king, it can stop a blade for a beta, and every wolf in this territory should have that protection. Not just the ones at the top." Lyra extended her hand. Serafina took it. The grip was firm, dry, and trembling slightly, the handshake of a woman who had just dismantled her own cruelty in public and was standing in the wreckage of it, uncertain and defiant. "We start tomorrow," Lyra said. The weeks that followed were not smooth. They were not a fairy tale epilogue where problems dissolved and everyone smiled. The Silvervein bloodline attracted attention from 3 border packs within days, exactly as Lyra had predicted. Envoys arrived at Ashenmore with politely phrased requests for access to the Silvervein Weaver. Requests that were, when stripped of diplomatic language, bids for control of her blood. Kyle met each envoy with the same response. "The Silvervein is not a resource. She is my mate and the Crown's protected citizen." End of discussion. 2 of the packs accepted this. The third, the Thorn Hollow pack, did not. Thorn Hollow's alpha, a wolf named Draven, had a personal history with the Silvervein bloodline. His grandmother had been among the hunters who drove the Silverveins to extinction, and the family had built its power on captured Silvervein artifacts, blood-infused weapons, and armor from the Purge. The artifacts were degrading. Without fresh Silvervein blood to maintain them, the weapons were becoming ordinary, and Draven's military advantage was evaporating. He needed a Silvervein. The last silver vein had just been publicly claimed by the Alpha King, which meant that Draven's options were diplomacy, which had failed, or force. He chose force, but he chose it cleverly. Lyra was in the weaving workshop when it happened, not the cellar. Kyle had built her a proper workshop on the ground floor of the Ashenmoor storehouse, with windows she could feel, and ventilation, and a loom made of white ash wood that resonated with the Moonthread so cleanly that the humming was like music. She had 3 apprentices now, all of them Omegas from the Pack Labor program. None of them blind, but all of them learning to feel the thread rather than watch it, to follow the vibration rather than the visual pattern. She was teaching them the blood integration technique, the way the thread responded to contact with living blood when she felt it. A disruption in the field of her perception. A dark spot. Not a heat signature she recognized. Something cold. Something that moved through the workshop wall like smoke. "Down," she said. Her apprentices did not question her. They dropped. The wall exploded inward, not with the force of a battering ram, but with the precise surgical application of a shaped charge, a ring of explosive placed with military precision to create an opening large enough for 3 wolves to enter in formation. They came in fast, armored. She perceived them as cold spots because their armor was specifically designed to mask heat signatures, lined with null stone, a mineral that absorbed thermal energy. They were Thorn Hollow operatives. She knew this because the null stone was the signature material of Draven's forces, the degrading silver vein artifacts repurposed for stealth. "The Weaver," one of them said. "Alive. Move." They reached for her. Lyra's wolf did not howl, did not hesitate, did not wait for rescue. The silver light that had been building inside her for weeks, growing stronger with each day of proper food and rest, and the steady anchor of the mate bond, erupted from her hands, not as a weapon, as a shield. The Moonthread in the room responded. Every spool, every cut strand, every fiber on the loom and in the baskets and in the apprentices' hands. The thread moved. It wove itself without a loom, without a shuttle, without human hands. It flew from the spools and the baskets and formed a lattice in the air around Lyra and her apprentices, a dome of living moon thread that pulsed with silver light and sang with a frequency that made the null stone armor on the Thorn Hollow wolves crack. The lead operative hit the lattice. The Moonthread held. It did more than hold. It tightened around his fist, wrapped his gauntlet, climbed his arm. He screamed, not in pain, in terror. The thread was reading him, the way Lyra's blood had taught it to read, and what it found was hostile intent. And the thread's response to hostile intent was not passive absorption, but active containment. It bound him, wrapped him from wrist to shoulder in seconds. He fell, cocooned. The second operative shifted. Full wolf, a dark grey beast that charged the lattice with jaws open. The Moonthread met him in mid-air. It was, Lyra thought with a distant, crystalline clarity, like watching her own instinct made visible. The thread did not strangle or cut. It wrapped, it bound, it neutralized. The wolf hit the floor in a silver cocoon, snarling and immobile. The third operative ran. He did not get far. Kyle was in the doorway. Lyra perceived his arrival as an explosion of gold light, his wolf fully surfaced, his body halfway between human and beast, eyes amber and burning. He caught the fleeing operative by the throat and held him against the wall with one hand, feet off the ground. "Thorn Hollow," Kael said. His voice was the voice of his wolf, deep and layered and vibrating at a frequency that made Lyra's lattice hum in response. The operative choked. "Draven sent us. Alive. He wanted her alive. He will get you back dead if he tries again." Kael looked past the operative, into the workshop, at the silver lattice dome, still humming around Lyra and her apprentices, at the two Thorn Hollow wolves, cocooned on the floor in living moonthread. "Or perhaps he will get you back wrapped in a thread you cannot cut, wearing armor that your null stone cannot penetrate, carrying a message from my mate that she is not a resource to be acquired." He looked at Lyra. She could not see his expression in the way sighted people read expressions, but through her perception, she could see the shape of his emotion. The gold of his wolf was turbulent, surging, still in combat mode. But underneath the turbulence, at the core, there was a steady, quiet light. Not pride exactly. Recognition. The recognition of a man watching his mate defend herself with power he had always known she possessed, but had never seen deployed. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She lowered her hands. The lattice remained in place, holding, protecting. The apprentices? "Unharmed," said the nearest one, a young Omega named Tessa, whose voice was shaking but whose hands, Lyra noted, were still gripping a spool of moonthread in a way that suggested she had been ready to throw it. "Good," Lyra said. "Maren, when she arrives, should check the operative in the cocoon on the left. The thread tightened around his rib cage, and I do not want compression injuries. The thread is meant to hold, not harm." Kael made a sound, almost a laugh. "You are concerned about the health of the man who came to abduct you. I am concerned about the precedent. If the silver vein weave is going to be a tool of defense for this territory, it needs to be known as a tool that restrains without destroying. That distinction is important. Why? Because the silver veins were hunted to extinction by packs that feared their power. If the power is perceived as lethal, the fear will return, and the hunting will start again. If it is perceived as protective, as containing, as fundamentally oriented toward preservation of life rather than destruction of it, then the power becomes something people want to be inside of, not running from." Kael was quiet for a long moment. "You have been thinking about this." "I have been thinking about it for 3 years, in a cellar, with nothing to do but think." He crossed the workshop. His hand found her face in the familiar gesture, cupping her jaw, tilting her face up. Through her perception, she saw his wolf settle. The gold light calmed, deepened, steadied. His thumb traced her jaw, the way it had in the cellar, slow and deliberate, a gesture that had become, she realized, their language. The touch that said, "I am here," without requiring words. "Draven will not stop," he said quietly. "No, he will escalate. Then we prepare. Then we prepare." She turned back to the loom. The lattice above her dissolved, the moonthread returning to its spools with a whisper of silk on silk. She picked up the shuttle. Her apprentices, shaken but upright, returned to their stations. Tessa's hands had stopped trembling. She was watching Lyra, with the particular expression that Lyra could not see, but could feel, the heat signature of admiration, which was warmer and steadier than fear. They wove. The moonthread hummed. Outside the workshop, Kael organized the defense perimeter. And Lyra could feel him through the bond, a constant warm pressure in her chest, the hand on the other side of the wall, holding the structure upright. The war with Thorn Hollow lasted 6 weeks. It ended not with a battle, but with a binding. Draven brought his forces to Ashen Moor's border, 300 wolves in null stone armor, expecting to overwhelm the territory's defenses and take the Silver Vein Weaver by force. What he found was a border lined with Moonthread, not a wall, a web. Lyra and her apprentices had woven it over 4 weeks, a lattice of blood-infused moonthread stretched between the border stones, invisible to conventional sight, but blazing silver to any wolf with the senses to perceive it. Draven's wolves hit the web at full charge. The moonthread caught them, all of them. 300 wolves, cocooned in silver thread, that sang with a single sustained note, held motionless, unharmed, and utterly unable to move. Draven himself reached the web last. He was an older wolf, larger than his soldiers, with the weathered energy signature of a man who had been powerful for decades and could not conceive of a world in which his power was insufficient. He hit the web, and the moon thread wrapped him, and Lyra, standing 20 yards behind the borderline with Kael at her side, felt the moment the thread read him. It found something she did not expect. Beneath the hostility, beneath the strategic calculation, beneath the decades of building power on stolen Silver Vein blood, there was a memory. The thread showed it to her, the way it showed her all things, as a heat pattern, an emotional contour. Draven, young, perhaps 10, standing in a room where his grandmother was destroying the last Silver Vein artifacts, not for military advantage, but because she could not bear to look at them anymore. She was weeping. The artifacts smelled like moonlight and blood, and she could not stop weeping. And young Draven, who did not understand, put his hand on her arm and said, "Grandmother, why are you crying?" And she had said, "Because I killed the woman who made these. I killed her because they told me to. And the things she made are more beautiful than anything I will ever create, and I destroyed her for it, and I cannot undo it." Draven had built his power on the artifacts his grandmother wept over. He had pursued the last Silver Vein, not purely for military advantage, but because somewhere in the complex, contradictory architecture of his psychology, he believed that if he could control a Silver Vein, he could retroactively justify what his grandmother had done, transform murder into strategy, make the destruction meaningful rather than merely monstrous. It did not excuse him. It explained him. And Lyra, standing behind the borderline, with her wolf blazing silver inside her chest, decided that explanation was sufficient for mercy. "Release him last," she told Kyle. "Let him watch his army bound and helpless. Let him feel what powerlessness tastes like. Then release him and send him home with a message. Tell him the Silver Vein bloodline is not a resource. It is a responsibility. And the thread that caught his army could have killed them. It chose not to. Tell him to consider what that means." Kale looked at her. Through the bond, she felt his response, the complex emotional temperature of a man whose mate had just immobilized an army without drawing blood and was now requesting mercy for the man who sent assassins to her workshop. It was not agreement exactly. It was the recognition that she was right, coupled with the instinctive resistance of a wolf who wanted to tear Draven's throat out for threatening what was his. "You are going to be a difficult queen," he said. "I am going to be an effective queen. There is a difference." He almost smiled. She could feel it in his heat signature, the subtle warming at the corners of his mouth There is indeed. Draven was released. He returned to Thorn Hollow with his army, none of them injured, all of them forever altered by the experience of being caught in a web they could not break, held by a power that could have destroyed them, and chose instead to hold them gently, firmly, and without malice. The border attacks stopped, not because Draven had been defeated, because he had been shown something he could not unsee. The Silvervein power was not a weapon. It was a choice, and the woman who wielded it had chosen mercy when she had every reason, every right, every justification to choose violence. Ashen Moor rebuilt. Seraphina took a council seat and overhauled the Omega labor program with the methodical ferocity of a woman making amends she would never publicly acknowledge. The cellar under the storehouse was sealed. Not demolished. Sealed. Lyra insisted on this. She did not want the cellar destroyed. She wanted it remembered. She wanted every wolf who walked past the storehouse to know that behind that sealed door was a room where a woman had been locked and starved and bled, and that the woman who emerged from that room had chosen to protect the pack that caged her. On the night of the first full moon after the border binding, Lyra stood in the weaving workshop with her hands on the loom. The moonthread hummed beneath her fingers. The scars on her fingertips glowed faintly silver, permanent marks of the years of unprotected weaving, the price paid in blood for a gift she had not understood. She wore thimbles now. Good ones, leather-lined, sized to her fingers, made by the Iron Moor armorer at Kael's specific instruction. But sometimes, when the weave required precision beyond what thimbled fingers could achieve, she removed them, and the thread found her blood, and the weave deepened, and she felt in the familiar sting the connection between cost and creation that was the core of Silvervein power. You protected with your blood. That was the deal. Your life, literally in the cloth. Kael came into the workshop. She felt him before she heard him, the warm gold presence in the bond that was now as constant as her own heartbeat. He stood behind her. His hands, larger than hers by half, came around her waist and rested on the curve of her belly, which had begun to swell 3 weeks ago. Maren said the pup was healthy. Maren said the pup's blood markers were already showing Silvervein traits, which meant the bloodline would continue, would not end with Lyra, would persist into a generation that would be born into protection rather than persecution. Maren also said that Lyra needed to stop weaving 12-hour days, which Lyra had acknowledged and then ignored, because the border lattice needed maintenance, and the armor program was scaling, and there were 6 more Omegas learning the blood integration technique, and they needed her hands, her scarred, glowing, impossible hands, to guide the work. Kael's palms were warm on her belly. Through the bond, she felt his wolf, settled and present, a golden weight inside his chest that had not stirred in restless searching since the day he walked down 12 stairs into a cellar and found what he had been looking for. "The chest plate," he said. "The one you finished in the cellar. I wore it again today." "I know, I felt it. You felt it from across the compound. I feel every piece of armor I have made, every thread. They are all connected to me, to my blood. When you wear the chest plate, I feel your heartbeat in my hands." He pressed his face into her hair. She felt the heat of his exhale, the cedarwood and iron scent that was now so intertwined with her own moonlight and blood scent that she could not tell where his ended and hers began. "Your hands," he said quietly. She looked down at them. Through her silver perception, she could see the scars, The lines of old moonthread cuts mapped across her fingertips like a river system, each one a mark of a night spent bleeding in the dark, weaving protection for a world that did not know she existed. The thimbles sat on the edge of the loom, removed for this particular piece, and her bare fingers rested on the thread, and the thread hummed, and the scars glowed, and her wolf, silver and vast, and finally, fully awake, pressed gently against her ribs from the inside, content. Lyra picked up the shuttle. The moonthread found her fingers. Her blood found the weave. She wove,